Let's start with a very interesting Reddit story from Stories Keller. Park in a private space and block an entrance? Pay the fines and the damages. Obligatory disclaimers. On mobile, non-English speaker, not in the US. Also, you need my permission to post elsewhere. This incident happened in the summer of 2018. I took a small part, but the real star was my landlord. A small background. It's common in my country to have apartment buildings next to houses, yard and all. I live in one such building. It has 10 apartments. 2 on each of the first 4 floors, 1 in the ground floor and 1 in the top floor. The top floor is used by the landlord when he and his family come for vacations. He lives abroad. The rest are rentals. We also have a small backyard with a side entrance, important for later. Next to the building is an empty lot, also belonging to the landlord. We use it as private parking space, with signs visibly saying it's private. It takes 10 cars, 1 per apartment, and has the side entrance. Also, I was the longest tenant, so I was the superintendent. My job was to be the liaison between the tenants and the landlord and communicate any problems and concerns to him. The problem started when the house across the street from us was sold. A lovely old lady used to live there, but when she passed away, the house fell on disarray, especially the large yard. The new owners were Ken and Karen, fake names, but lived up to the meme. They immediately began major renovations, which was acceptable. But they also started park their cars in our 2 empty spots, 1 for the landlord and 1 for the lady in the ground floor that didn't own a car. At first, we would tell they were reserved spots and they would move their cars. But when they noticed the spots remained empty, they parked there permanently. I had notified the landlord, and he told me to take pictures, log every incident, and always notify the police. We started doing that every day. Ken is a hotshot local businessman, and every time we called, the cops would cause a scene about us being jerks. He always got a fine, but he very blatantly proclaims he will not pay. The worst part came about a month before the landlord's annual visit. They stopped using one of their cars and left it permanently in front of the side entrance, blocking it. That was a huge issue. You see, the lady living in the ground floor is a renal dialysis patient and 3 times a week goes for a session in the local hospital. The ambulance brings her back and usually parked next to the side entrance because she is exhausted after a session. With Karen's car parked there, that wasn't doable anymore. They don't move it even when the police is called. I notify the landlord and try to hold our own hothead from doing anything foolish. The calmer thing he proposed was slashing their tyres. Finally, our landlord arrives. I hand him the photos and the logs and he calls Ken over. Tony, the landlord, calmly explains that they are not allowed to park in our space and to move the cars. Ken's response was, "Who the hell do you think you are? I can park anywhere I want." Now, Ken thinks himself as a big fish in our small town. But Tony is a big fish in a major foreign city. And he is very creative when somebody pisses him off. He tells us to leave the spot next to the side entrance open for the weekend, and he will take care of things. We do that, and Ken parks his car next to his wife's. Sunday evening, a tow truck arrives and unloads an old Citroen DS, also known as the Frog, blocking both of their cars. Monday morning, I wake by the buzzer, and when I go downstairs, Ken and Karen are there. They are both livid. They can't move either car. Tony joins me, all smiles. Ken sees him and blows a gasket. He starts shouting and cursing. Tony, still smiling, replies, "I don't see a problem. My car is legally parked. What are you going to do about it?" Ken angrily gets into his car and reverses on the DS, crushing them both. Tony's smile became one of a shark. He immediately called the police. He pressed charges against Ken. The aftermath. Tony had legally bought the DS from his cousin that owns a car repair and restoration shop. The car was a restoration project and was insured. The court found Ken liable for the damage done. They also found out he was true to his word and hadn't paid any of the tickets. The fines for the tickets alone were almost 2,000 euro. He also leased both his cars and they dropped him as a client immediately for purposefully causing an accident and damaging the leased car. They're sued for damages. Ken got another car, but learned his lesson and hasn't parked in our spots ever since. The revenge was flawlessly executed. Tony played the long game, using legal loopholes and patience to outsmart Ken. Blocking the cars with the Citroen DS was a brilliant move, forcing Ken to destroy his own vehicles. The next story is from Garmdian. Make me look bad on the job? Well, we'll see about that. I worked at a clothing store in a mall for a year and a half. It was not fun. But I was think back to my time there recently, and I forgot this golden gem of prorevenge. So a new girl had just been hired, as many new people did in that job, and right away you could tell she thought she was hot shit. We're talking acting like a manager, talking how many hours she had, and worst of all, she wouldn't shut up about all the dudes she was banging, and how the money she got from them was the most important part. To put it lightly, she was a cold-hearted bitch who made everyone feel bad about their insignificant lives, as she put it. Here's where things go down. In our store, all the racks were milled steel bars and hooks, so really hard to break and really expensive. They could, however, be bent out of shape if enough heavy coats stay on them for long periods of time. Ms. Hot Shit here, though, it would be a good idea to impress the management by putting all the coats on the same rack using the milled steel bars instead of a circular rack that wouldn't warp. I protested, of course, as I'd been there longer, but she said, "I get paid more than you, so do what I say." She got hired as a key holder out of the gate, so she made $1 more than I did per hour. I go along with it, put the heavy winter coats up on the milled steel, and go about my life. Well, 2 weeks later, the milled steel is of course warped, and when management saw this, they flipped. Cheapo store. Any cost was bad to them. Anyways, she blames it on me, and I get written up for it. Now I refused to sign, so they gave me less hours, which also cut my pay. Because she lied, I was now making 50% less than before and had a formal written complaint against me. To say I was ticked off wouldn't even start. So I devised a plan. Go get back at her. You see, the drywall on the centre pillars had sustained water damage for an early melt earlier that year, making them extremely soft. However, they provide some of the largest coverage of shelf space in the entire store, meaning basically a good 20% of shelf space couldn't be used. Now the kicker is Ms. Hot didn't know about this as she came in a week after it had happened, and to the naked eye, you wouldn't think the pillar couldn't be used as there was banners on it to try and hide the yellowing. I may have suggested what a waste not being able to have product on the pillars was, and how, if someone could come up with a nice display, it would bring in a lot of customers due to how people could see it from the mall main floor. We were just off the food court. Her eyes lit up. Now here's the thing. I was taking a small break to a nice snowy lake cabin the next day, and the people she had working with her were the manager or the temps who were not allowed to handle marketing and logistics, i.e. putting shelves, rack up on the wall due to their cost, and the incident that got me wrote up. Now I knew she wouldn't want the managers to see it because she wanted all the glory from it. She wanted to show to our 3 stores in the mall that her store was the best while the managers weren't around. So she, being with a temp, and them not being able to put up shelving, put the heavy winter clothing on milled steel racks attached to the soft drywall pillars. Within a week, the drywall on the pillars collapsed and ruined $500 worth of product. Now she tried to shift blame on me, but I was away for the whole week, so it could not have been me, because obviously that can't happen if I'm in the forest, hundreds of miles from civilization. So no dice there, and she promptly got charged with the repair, demoted to sales associate, and written up for what they finally realized was not just this, but the one they wanted me to sign. The repair was $2,500 plus the $500 stock that got destroyed when 40 pounds of dry wool came crushing down on it. But I wasn't done yet. You see, our manager in our store specifically was pretty chill, and she's still a personal friend to me. She had a group chat so we could talk off hours and keep up to date. Now, as I mentioned before, she wouldn't shut up about all the men she was playing and how the only thing that mattered was the money. And boy, oh boy, did she use the group chat to say a lot of this. Sometimes one of these dudes would come around and take her for lunch. Let's just say when she was in the back for a little while, finishing something up, that I let them see the text channel if they promised not to let her know I told them. So often they'd go on their lunch date, and after 1 or 2 days, she'd be down a man. Finally, this boiled over when one of them took her phone, saw how many guys she had being banging for money, and messaged all of them about how much of a lying cheat she was. After 2 months, her fountain of man money dried up, and how demoted to a sales associate she didn't have the money to spend on all her lavish nights out or designer clothing, she eventually moved up to another store for more hours and stole money from the till, causing her to get fired. A fitting end to a backstabbing ice queen, I think. I eventually left that job after half a year later to pursue my current job. TL. DR. Bitchy co-worker blames me for a task she commanded me to do, so I set her up to fail, cost her $3,000, ruin her relationships she's having with 10 different men. She then steals from the company and gets fired. Edit. To clear things up, to those saying that charging an employee for repairs is illegal 100%. However, she decided to instead take a pay cut until it was paid back and keep her job rather than be fired. Min wage here is $15 an hour, so she took the cut down to approx. $12 in order to pay it back. Also, this company is super sketch and will do anything not to pay for their mistakes, even going so far as to leave a hole in the roof, water damage, there for 10 months before fixing it, making so during spring nothing could be put there. The revenge was incredibly satisfying and well executed. OP's arrogant co-worker got what she deserved, and she paid the price for her actions. The next story is from Beaker Cummings. Teacher verbally abused suicidal classmate. Now everyone knows. This was back in HS when I was 17. I'm currently 20. I was in a class for forensics, and this teacher was notorious for making fun of students. I'll call her Bitch Teacher. To put in perspective how much I hate her, I got a pet cockroach and named it after her. In this class, she would have students take attendance by lining up and answering a question at her desk before going to sit down. This is important for later. It started with things such as making fun of students who weren't in class to hear, poking fun at how they looked, their grades, their clothes, etc. Things slowly escalated as the year progressed to where she would mock my voice in front of everyone whenever I spoke. I also have a very growly voice because I used to get recurring scarlet fever for years, which permanently damaged my vocal cords. Said transgender people were a burden. We had a trans boy in the class, that depression wasn't real, etc. At first, it was fine. It's not like she was saying anything I've never heard before from my shitty classmates about each other. But then comes in my classmate who I'll call Small. Cuss. She's Small. Small was a quiet and very sweet girl. She was funny and always nice to everyone. But she had really bad depression and anorexia. And she would be bullied a lot because her parents weren't the best. She often came to class smelling of her dad's chain smoking and in old hand-me-down clothes. Because Bitch Teacher would only encourage the bullying, Small eventually started cutting and wearing hoodies all the time to hide the cuts. But everyone knew. It got to the point where 2 people would take advantage of her poor family and pay her to scratch words on her leg or arm in class with a safety pin. Bitch Teacher did all, and trust me, she knew. Fast forward a few weeks, and we all line up as usual. The question was, what's your favorite type of music? Me and Small come up. I answer, and I'm heading to my seat when Small quietly goes, I don't know, I don't really have one. To which, and I kid you the not, Bitch Teacher goes full volume with a smile on her face. Well, what kind of music doesn't make you want to slit your wrists? At this point, the entire class goes dead silent. She had gone too far, and Small immediately runs out of the class. Everyone is too shocked to know what to really do. So we just move on with class. I still wish I had gone to check on her. After that, I just couldn't stand Bitch Teacher. I couldn't stand her existence. I couldn't stand looking at her smiling face. I wanted to rip that smile off. Every time she breathed, I wanted to strangle her. I was done with this. I began secretly recording every time she made fun of us. I would record entire classes and crop out what I needed. And then, one tiring month later, I emailed them all straight to the principal. Close to half an hour of this bitch making fun of everyone, making suicide jokes, etc. I fumed about how inappropriate and unacceptable this was, and I demanded justice. And holy justice I got. Bitch teacher didn't show up for a few days. When she came back, she had such a dead look in her eyes. Finally, no more of that goddamn smile. The principal calls us all together. And in front of everyone. Her husband, the students, and staff. She was forced to formally apologize for making fun of a suicidal 16-year-old. The look on her husband's face told me all I wanted. After this, I only ever needed to see her smoking alone and hated at the liquor store. The smile never came back. I never told anyone what I did, but everyone just knew, and a sense of overwhelming relief was very much welcomed in the class. Smole started going to therapy, and we became pretty good friends. She got the help she needed, she moved out of her family's home with her sister, and she developed healthier coping mechanisms. Is not a joke, and anyone who makes fun of someone even remotely entertaining the idea of suicide, this is what you deserve. To lose your job, lose your friends, lose your reputation, lose your husband, and a kid to name a cockroach after you. And for those of you in MS or HS dealing with bullying, a bad home life, or mental health problems, you can do this. Edit. IDK, some of you all can't read, I guess. She was fired. Lose your job. And to clarify on her husband, no, he wasn't called in from home. He was the algebra school teacher. The revenge was perfectly executed. The teacher's cruelty, especially towards a vulnerable student, was met with a well-planned, calculated response. The most satisfying part was the public apology. Kudos to OP. The next story is from the Kung Fu Panda. Trick me out of my laptop, you'll give me your car. 13 years ago, I was in my late teens, living on my own and really struggling to live financially. One of the few possessions I had was an old laptop. My laptop had stopped working properly, and while I'm fairly proficient in using a computer, I had no idea about fixing them. I did a bit of searching on the internet, but couldn't get it working, so I asked my stepdad to take a look. He has a quick look and says, but he'll take it off my hands if I don't want it. So I said, sure. If it's broken, then it's no good to me. 10 minutes later, I walk in the room and he's using it. I asked if he fixed it, and he says, yeah, thanks for the laptop. I was obviously pissed. My mum says she wasn't getting involved, and his only response was that he did a quick internet search to find the fix, and I could have done the same. I broke, and he took one of my only possessions, even though he had a PC and a laptop already. A few months later, I was visiting my mum and stepdad when I had an idea. While I am useless with computers, I'm very competent with mechanics. Specifically, Audis, and my stepdad had a 2001 Audi A3. Before coming in the house, I went under his car and unplugged the oil level sensor and a vac line for the turbo. Later on that day, he went to go to the shop or something. When he started the car, it threw up oil warning lights on the dash and wouldn't boost, so he turned it off and had a look of concern on his face. I went out to ask him what's up, and he said that something gone majorly wrong. He says something along the lines of catastrophic turbo failure or engine failure. He's already spent quite a bit on repairs and didn't want to spend any more money on it, so spoke to my mum about just cutting his losses and scrapping it. I asked how much it's worth at the scrapyard, and he says $100, so I ever so graciously offer $120 to take it off his hands to maybe part it out, which he accepts. He signed over the logbook, title, and wrote me a receipt of purchase and handed the keys over. I walked outside, lifted the bonnet, pretended to look at my phone for a minute, went under the car and plugged the vac line and oil sensor back in, fired it straight up and drove around the block. When I got back, I gave him the thumbs up and said, "It's all fine now." His mouth was wide open and he was mega pissed, and my reply was, "You could have found the solution too with a quick internet search." He tried arguing that it wasn't fair, and if it's working, then I can't just take his car. But I just said he didn't have a problem tricking me out of my laptop and that he's already signed the car over to me, so tough luck. My mum kind of laughed and said she's not getting involved and that it was his own fault. I still have the car to this day and it's practically in showroom condition and runs sweet. Here's the old girl in all her shiny glory. Edit. Thank you for all the awards people have guilted me with. I didn't know any of these existed beyond gold and silver. Edit 2. Guys and gals, it's not that unbelievable. I tricked someone into thinking their car was broken so I could have it. Yes, it's 100% true. Yes, I know I'm an asshole, and I don't deny that it was a douche move, but I thought people might get a kick out of a bit of revenge. The revenge was masterclass. OP's stepdad wanted to take advantage of him, but took a brutal revenge by unplugging parts of his car and compelling him to sell the car at a fraction of its value. It was really satisfying. The next story is from Vonadla. Fired? Are you sure? Okay. Note 1. This story was told to me by a friend and is about her father. I won't be able to answer many follow-up questions. It takes place around 2005. I believe the story to be true, but can't verify it, of course. Note 2. This happens in Sweden, where there's no at-will employment. Once an employee is past the initial 6-month probation period, you can't fire them without a cause, which also requires an established paper trail. Note 3. I am not a native English speaker, and professional terms may be wrong. I'm happy to take any corrections. So, my friend's father, since retired, was a mechanical engineer. He was around 55 when this happened, and very experienced in his field. In fact, he had some skill sets that were close to unique to the extent that you might be able to replicate them, but at extreme costs. We're talking multiple people from multiple companies, from multiple countries taking weeks, if not months, to get up to speed with specific projects to do the same things. He was also a no-bull kind of guy, who did his job, did it well, but also pointed out problems and expected others to point out problems to him. He was extremely solution-oriented and had no time for office politics or keeping a positive attitude at work. Basically, your everyday grumpy older engineer who really knew his thing and always ready to help if you asked, but not very forthcoming in team-building exercises and so on. He also ran his own business on the side, doing minor projects and so on. As was required by his employer, he had reported this and was sure to not cause any conflicts of interests, so his employer knew and accepted this. He was considered a valuable employee and got several awards, that he cared little for, but anyway, during his many years with this employer. By all accounts, they paid him well, respected his knowledge, and accommodated his style, and he returned the favor by working very hard and making sure to mentor younger and newly employed engineers to make them effective co-workers. Then his firm was acquired by a larger firm, and a new management team installed. Initially, everyone was promised that things would remain the same, but with the new management came a new office culture. The new management pressured for unpaid overtime, for a more American corporate culture with cheering and clapping and so on. He considered it extremely cringe and refused to participate. His status as a long-standing and knowledgeable employee kept him safe for some time, before the new management realized that resistance to the new culture centered around him and started pressuring him to play along. When he did not, they turned increasingly hostile, realizing that he held a lot of soft power in the company, having mentored a large percentage of the engineers and resistance to their leadership centering around him. They started ordering him to work overtime. He answered that he was on time with his projects, and that if they had identified an emergency requiring overtime, they would have to bring it up with the union to negotiate the overtime and make sure it was an actual emergency. The contract with the union said no overtime unless in an emergency. They tried to force him to participate in the cheering and clapping by making it mandatory for him to attend and yelling at him to participate. And he did, but so unenthusiastically that the event turned even more cringe and people started laughing. The workday turned more and more hostile, and he knew that things would come to head sooner or later. Being an experienced engineer and knowing how to document things, he already had his ducks in a row. Then it finally happened. They caught him answering an email for his side business on his work laptop, brought him in, and fired him on the spot for theft of company resources. He sat at the conference table and looked the three managers in their eyes, one after the other, and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" They all said yes. "Are you really sure you want to do this?" He was escorted to his desk by security to leave his phone, his badge, and his computer at the desk, and then escorted out. Once out of the building, he phoned his union representative, who immediately cancelled the firing, claiming there was no just cause, which meant that it would go to the Labour Board for arbitration. You see, the company had an IT policy that it was okay to use the company laptop for personal business, including a side business, as long as you were on a break and compliant with IT security protocols, and the company was aware of and had approved his side business. And he was on a break. Of course, he had his declaration of a side business signed by his former manager and the IT policy available, and sent both to the union representative. Then he called his lawyer and asked him to send the pre-prepared cease and desist on 2 patents he held. Patents that were not that significant and nothing he could make any serious money out of, since they were mostly for very specific things used by the solutions he designed and used at his employers, but still his that he had brought with him into the employment and allowed the employer to use in exchange for a slightly higher pay. All duly documented in his contract, of course. Then he went home for some vacation and tending his side business. He was always a man to prepare and had enough money saved up to last him for a good time, to the extent that he considered retiring entirely. My friend said he had 2 job offers from competitors that had looked to sniping him for some time within the week, basically as soon as they learned he was available. He was gracious, but declined, but offered them to consult with his side business now that he had the time, which they eagerly accepted, at twice the hourly rate he had made at his earlier employers. His colleagues started ringing the day after for advice. Since the projects he had managed could not go on without him, he was perfectly polite, but denied any information and help, saying he had left everything he had with management and to contact them, as he was no longer employed there. Several clients that phoned his private number were told the same thing. Since his private number was not on a public registry, he suspected that both colleagues and clients spent some time and/or money to find it. It took 2 weeks before a manager phoned him and asked things. He politely declined to answer, got yelled at, and replied with something like, "I am sorry, you must have mistaken me for someone who works for you," and hung up. This happened a few times, and the next week HR phoned him and stated the firing had been a mistake, and he was welcome back to his job. He again politely declined, saying that he awaited the Labour Board's decision. But until then, he was happy to consult for them. At 6 times his hourly pay, after taxes and administrative costs, of course. After a few days of wrangling and trying to negotiate, they had to accept. And then he sprung the patent issue on them, forcing them to pay for those too. Less than 2.5 weeks after being fired, he was back at his desk. After roughly 3 months, the firing came to the Labour Board. The employer stated that they believed they had handled the issue correctly, but were still willing to offer my friend's father his position back, in the interest of goodwill and reconciliation. My friend's father and the union simply stated that he was now employed elsewhere, his own company, and no longer available. The Labour Board ruled in my friend's father's and the union's favour, and he got the normal damages: 3 months' pay damage and 24 months' pay severance package, including pension, and of course the lawyer costs of the union paid by the employer. According to my friend, her father continued to work there until he retired, working 20 hours or so per week and 10-15 hours for other companies, making a pretty penny, continuing to charge them 3 times what he charged their competitors as an arsehole tax. The managers were not fired, but they were moved into their own group apart from the rest of the department when it came to bonus calculations and the costs of her father's consultancy fees, and the costs of the Labour Board arbitration were budgeted there, meaning they were constantly over budget and thus ineligible for bonuses for several years. which was a decent percentage of the incentives at that company, making at least one of them quit. My friend also said her father usually met any management complaints with a big shit-eating grin and, "What are you going to do? Fire me?" after that. Edit. Spelling corrections. The revenge was strategic and outclass. It is always wise for new administration to not mess up with veteran employees. The management paid for their short-sightedness, and OP's father got a very good opportunity.